God's blessings to everyone. This is a DGHradio.com news and information news update for the United States and world, and I'm reporter KKH reporting the news for September 28th, 2025, covering the latest developments from across the United States and the world. In Ukraine, one of the heaviest overnight barrages in months slammed Kiev and several regional centers, as waves of cruise missiles and explosive drones struck from multiple directions. Air defenses intercepted many targets, but debris and direct hits ignited fires, damaged apartment blocks and energy facilities, and briefly halted rail service in a suburban hub. Authorities reported multiple fatalities and dozens of injuries. Poland scrambled fighter jets to monitor its skies after radar tracked objects heading west, underscoring the risk of spillover toward North Atlantic Treaty Organization borders. Analysts say Moscow's mix of missiles and cheaper loitering munitions aims to saturate defenses, while Ukraine manages constrained interceptor supplies. Why it matters: sustained pressure on power grids and cities tests civilian morale, and partners resolve as winter nears. A question to watch: do repeated mass strikes shift the strategic balance or primarily terrorize civilians? On the Gaza front, armored columns pushed deeper into dense neighborhoods of Gaza City as air and artillery strikes continued. Aid groups warned that communications damage and blocked roads prevented responders from reaching many calls, while hospitals and shelters strained under shortages of food, medicine, and clean water. Diplomatic efforts continue, including a detailed 21-point proposal from Washington that links a phased withdrawal, the release of hostages, and disarmament steps with humanitarian access and security arrangements. Meanwhile, reported casualties climbed even as international appeals for a ceasefire intensified. Regionally, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan formalized a defense accord that expands training and intelligence cooperation, a sign of shifting security calculations as Gulf states hedge their guarantees. Why it matters: the day-to-day humanitarian crisis intersects with fast-moving regional alignments and diplomacy at the United Nations. Questions ahead: can predictable, protected aid corridors be enforced in urban combat, and will regional pacts relieve tensions or raise escalation risks? In Asia's maritime flashpoint, tensions ticked up after a close encounter between a United States destroyer conducting a freedom of navigation operation and a Chinese Coast Guard vessel in the South China Sea. The near miss revived calls for better incident prevention protocols as neighbors weigh their own security choices. At the United Nations, India forcefully rebuked Pakistan's terrorism accusations, illustrating how familiar rivalries reverberate on the global stage. And back in the Americas, a diplomatic rift widened when the United States revoked Colombian President Gustavo Petro's visa following protests and remarks made during the General Assembly week. Why it matters: these episodes frame the contested rules of the road at sea, online, and in diplomacy, shaping how crises are managed before they spiral. Here at home, Washington faces a funding deadline at midnight Tuesday. The president is set to confer with congressional leaders in a last-ditch bid to keep agencies open, with options ranging from full-year appropriations to a short-term patch. Agencies have circulated contingency plans should a lapse occur, which would furlough many workers and disrupt services, even as essential operations continue. That standoff overlaps with consequential court action. The Supreme Court temporarily allowed the administration to withhold roughly $4 billion in foreign aid while litigation proceeds, raising separation of powers questions about Congress's control of the purse. The justices also agreed to hear a case that could redefine how states and platforms handle social media content moderation, and the administration is pressing the court to take up a challenge to birthright citizenship, testing the reach of the 14th Amendment. Why it matters: budget brinkmanship and high-stakes rulings affect paychecks, data releases, foreign projects, and foundational rights. Questions to consider: would a narrow stopgap or a broader deal better stabilize agencies? And where should courts draw the line between executive flexibility and legislative authority? Public safety headlines: in coastal North Carolina, 3 people were killed and at least 8 injured when a gunman opened fire at a waterfront venue before escaping by boat. A multi-jurisdictional search is underway. In Portland, the federal deployment of troops to reinforce security around government facilities rekindled debate over civil-military boundaries. The city's mayor argued that calm prevails unless force creates confrontation. And in Iowa, the superintendent of Des Moines Public Schools was detained by federal authorities amid an ongoing investigation, with district leaders moving to ensure continuity of school operations. Why it matters. These incidents test emergency response, community trust, and the balance between security and civil liberties. A question ahead. What guardrails keep public safety efforts effective without eroding public confidence? On markets and the economy, Wall Street rallied Friday after inflation figures roughly matched expectations, though the major indexes still finished the week lower. Traders now expect any additional Federal Reserve rate cuts to be gradual and tied closely to incoming labor and price data. In currency news, Seoul said Washington affirmed that South Korea is not manipulating its exchange rate, easing a long-running source of uncertainty for exporters and investors. Meanwhile, a sweeping infrastructure law was signed, unlocking funds for roads, bridges, transit, grid upgrades, rural broadband, and electric vehicle charging, projects expected to create jobs and bolster competitiveness as implementation ramps up. Why it matters. Rates, currencies, and infrastructure outlays shape borrowing costs, investment, and supply chains across the United States and Asia. Questions to watch. Are markets underestimating the risk of inflation stalling above target, and will clarity on currency policy unlock delayed corporate investment? Science, health, and space bring a dose of cautious optimism. An experimental Alzheimer's therapy slowed cognitive decline in a large late-stage trial, meeting primary and secondary goals tied to memory, function, and brain scan measures, though side effects will require careful monitoring and access questions loom. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported that this season's influenza vaccine is showing meaningful protection in early data, reducing medical visits and hospitalizations among the vaccinated, and NASA advanced preparations for the Europa Clipper mission, which will perform dozens of flybys of Jupiter's icy moon to assess whether its subsurface ocean could be habitable. Why it matters. From preserving cognitive function to preventing seasonal surges and probing the conditions for life beyond Earth, these developments touch families, hospitals, and humanity's horizon. A question forward. How do we ensure equitable access to breakthrough therapies that are costly to deliver? Climate and extreme weather alerts span several regions. Vietnam evacuated thousands and suspended flights as Typhoon Boiloy neared the central coast with dangerous winds, storm surge, and torrential rain on already saturated ground, raising landslide and river flood risk through midweek. Across the Atlantic Basin, a powerful Hurricane Humberto at sea is sending hazardous surf and rip currents toward the northern Caribbean and the southeastern United States, while a separate system near the Bahamas, likely to become the next named storm, could threaten the Carolinas depending on how steering winds evolve. In Arizona, deadly flash floods tore through the historic mining town of Globe and other communities, prompting rooftop rescues and road closures as debris-choked culverts failed. And in Southern California, the fast-moving canyon fire triggered mass evacuations, 0% containment early on, and air quality alerts over a wide area. Why it matters. Compounding storms and heat-dried landscapes are turning extreme events into cascading infrastructure and health crises. Questions for communities. Which culverts, grids, and flood maps need the fastest upgrades? And how should beach towns manage high-surf tourism during rip current emergencies? Technology and industry pivot towards scale and accountability. A consortium of rival automakers will build a continent-wide, high-speed charging network compatible with the dominant connector standards and powered by renewable energy, an attempt to eliminate range anxiety and accelerate electric vehicle adoption. Separately, newly released files from long-running investigations reignited scrutiny of elite networks as a prominent technology chief publicly denied meaningful ties to a disgraced financier after his name appeared in schedules. Observers cautioned that document mentions alone do not imply wrongdoing. Why it matters. Infrastructure partnerships can make or break consumer transitions, while transparency and due diligence remain essential to public trust in leaders and brands. Questions ahead. Can a multi-company charging venture deliver consistent reliability, and what safeguards protect innocent parties when old records surface? Law, justice, and norms continue to collide. A former senior clemency official alleged that high-dollar donations and connections have distorted pardon and commutation decisions, reigniting debate over reforming an opaque process to protect victims' rights and ensure equity for ordinary petitioners. A conservative Supreme Court justice again questioned the weight of past precedents, arguing that flawed rulings deserve re-examination rather than automatic deference, an approach supporters say corrects errors and critics say undermines legal stability. And media voices weighed the politics of rapid power consolidation, warning that haste can backfire by galvanizing opposition and eroding institutional trust. Why it matters: the legitimacy of justice and the durability of law depend on transparency, predictability, and public confidence. Questions to consider: what reforms could restore fairness to clemency? And when does revisiting precedent strengthen rather than weaken the rule of law? In lighter and cultural notes that nonetheless reveal something about our times, comedians seized on a viral clip from a global summit to poke fun at a leader's awkward moment on an escalator, proof that satire still punches through the noise even in heavy news cycles. But humor aside, the policy stakes remain serious. Sports closes us out with a milestone down under. The Brisbane Lions captured their 5th Australian Football League premiership of this century, defeating Geelong in a statement victory that energized fans and inspired young athletes across Australia. Why it matters: sport binds communities, and consistent excellence offers a blueprint for development and teamwork that travels well beyond the field. These and other issues are of great concern within the islands. What do you think are some good solutions? Let us know your thoughts by texting your comments to 1-315-898-1449. You can also join our WhatsApp group and get the news, weather, and other insightful information delivered right to your smartphone. To join, text JOIN to 1-315-898-1449. Please include your name in the text message. You will receive a call to verify your request. I'm your reporter, KKH, signing off for DGHradio.com. Remember, KKH and DGH, together we provide key facts, keen judgment, and honesty as we deliver groundbreaking headlines. Ciao.